Hey guys, how's it doing? It's me, Base Libertarian, and today I want to talk about the in-groups that have voted for Labour and the Lib Dems. So yeah, as you know, Labour won a majority landslide. They have about 2/3 of the seats, maybe more. And the reason for this is basically that the Conservative Party, the Conservative government has been the worst government in history. Inflation has been very high, the taxes have been higher than ever, um, our public institutions are rife with managerialism, everything's broken, nothing works. Tens of billions have been given to Ukraine, nothing's been given to our actual public services, our rivers are being polluted with sewage, and immigration has gone rampant. In other words, the Conservative government is not conservative. And so, yes, Labour have won as a result. However, their victory is actually very underwhelming when you look at the stats. Like, compared to 2019, they have 500,000 fewer votes. And that's because, well, the only reason why they have 209 extra seats is because the Conservative Party lost half of their popular vote, leading to 2/3 of their seats being lost. But the biggest victory of them all is the Lib Dems, which have gained 61 seats, despite having a 12% popular vote. And I'm going to talk about why the Lib Dems have won so many seats later in this video. So yeah, the voting system in this country is very unfair, very disproportionate. I've seen videos like this, which have been talking about how Reform have been cheated the most when it comes to winning seats. I voted for Reform, and unfortunately my side has lost. We have 14% of a popular vote, yet only 1% of the seats. The Lib Dems have fewer votes, yet 12 times more seats. And worst of all, the voter turnout has been so underwhelming that even though the Labour Party won, they only have 20% of the population voting for them, which means 80% of people did not vote for them. And you compare that against the Tories in 2019, the Tories had 44% more votes, absolutely. Now, I've seen lots of videos on YouTube talking about things that don't matter, like the media gaffes and Sky TV. But I don't care about this. I only care about the in-groups and why they voted for these political parties and the policies that they care about most. I am talking about the popular vote, because if a party has a big enough popular vote, they will win the seats, most likely. So, Labour's voting base consists of teachers, NHS staff, students, public civil servants, and those who are on benefits, and those who have student loans. If you add all of these people up, that's 17 million people. And if you actually look at the realistic votes in terms of the polling, well, 57% of teachers, 64% of NHS staff, 46% of students, 700,000 people with student loans, and those on benefits. I have exaggerated it with those who are on benefits who are going to vote for Labour, but nevertheless, 7.3 million people. To have that many people voting for you by default is impressive. And this is the biggest strength of the Labour Party. Their majority consists of a log-rolling minority of people. So the Lib Dem voter base, it can be explained quite well with this YouGov article. So here, Lib Dem and Labour voters are polled on what their political views are. And for the most part, they have the same political views. They believe that rich people should be taxed more than the average person. They believe in multiculturalism. They believe in having a close relationship with the European Union. They are against big businesses. They support nationalising public utilities. And they believe in same-sex marriage. This is unsurprising. But what's more interesting is the differences where the Lib Dems are much more hesitant towards the following. Ordinary working people do not get their fair share of the nation's wealth. Government should redistribute income from the better off to those who are less well off. In the Israel-Gaza conflict, do your sympathies lie with the Palestinian side, and welfare benefits in the UK are not generous enough. On all these issues, the Lib Dems disagree more. This means three important things. One, Lib Dem voters are wealthier. As they are better off, they do not believe in the distribution of their wealth. You can't see this graph, sorry about that. Number two, Lib Dem voters consist of less ethnic minority groups, and they don't care about what's happening in other places of the world, like in the Middle East. And three, Lib Dem voters tend to be either retired, or close to retirement, or employed. Either way, they are opposed to a welfare state generally, because none of these people actually live on welfare, unlike Labour voters. And also, according to the Sky News poll, the Lib Dems only poll 6% with the ethnic minority communities. And as you can see this photograph on the top, most of these guys are just old white people. In fact, no, it's one of two types of people. Either young white students or old white people. And there are other graphs that show the demographic composition of Lib Dem voters and all of the other party voters. For example, the Labour Party has the highest proportion of working voters, while the Conservatives have the lowest proportion of working voters, and that's because most of their voters are actually retired. Because the Conservative voter is the eternal boomer. These are selfish people who don't care about anyone else apart from themselves. The Lib Dem and Reform voters are somewhere in the middle. Most of them are working, a lot of them are retired. And more interestingly, if you look at gross household income, what you find is really interesting. It turns out for those who earn under £20,000 a year, a lower proportion of these voters are Lib Dem and Labour voting, and a higher proportion of those are voting for Conservative, which is completely mind-boggling. I don't understand this. And the exact opposite is true. For those who earn £60,000 and over, a higher proportion of those are voting for Lib Dem and Labour, which also is mind-boggling to me. And the only way that I can rationalise this is if the rich people are trying to buy into Labour and the Lib Dems to seize those parties as their own, because they know that they've lost the Tory party. The Tory party is done for. And this actually makes sense when you listen to Keir Starmer's comments on saying that he wants to make the Labour Party more friendly to big business. As a white pill, and I think this is a good thing, a higher proportion of Conservative and Reform voters earn between £20,000 and £60,000 a year, which I think is a good thing because it goes to show that these kinds of voters, they are the average person who just wants to work their job and live a normal life. They're not selfish people. If you look at housing tenure, a significant proportion of those who own homes with the mortgages paid for are Conservatives. Yeah, and if you look at age, which is probably the most important demographic for these voters, you see here that for the 18-24 years olds, most of these people are Lib Dem and Labour voters, and all of these people are in university probably. Whereas with the over 65-year-olds, you've got most of these voters are Conservatives, because the Conservatives are these selfish boomers who are living their lives in retirement, insensitive to what's happening to the world around them. But if you look between the 50 and 64-year-old voters, these people are those who are higher income working class. They're not retired, but they're earning a lot of money in their salaries, and they are in a very well-off position. Most of these voters are either Conservatives or Lib Dems. These are people who ideally don't want to pay as much tax, but also they tend to be living in areas that are quite well off. And obviously most of the working class are Labour. I just want to show you this immigration map, which shows that in London there's a huge influx of a foreign-born population, and in Leeds over here, but elsewhere, especially the south, there's very little immigrants. This is really important because it explains why Labour have run so many votes in the south, so many seats and constituencies in the south. So, to summarise your average Lib Dem voter, they support mass migration, unless if it affects them. They support welfare because they want a wealthier population, but they don't really care about it too much because they don't want to pay more taxes to pay for it. They are liberal on many social issues like same-sex marriage. They don't care about the minimum wage unless if it's for the social workers who look after their parents and themselves soon. 56% of their voters are in the south, which, again, very little immigration numbers. 66% of them own a home, and half of those outright own a home, which explains why they are so against Brexit, because Brexit negatively impacts house prices. Your typical Lib Dem voter is either a 50 to 64-year-old who is working, earns between 60 and 100,000 a year, or they're actually the younger people, 18 to 24 years old, who doesn't earn that much money, but because they're Lib Dem voters, they tend to be higher educated, and that's just a one demographic that the Lib Dems do really well in. So, finally, to summarise this video, let me give you a synopsis of all of these in-groups in the UK. You got the teachers voting Labour, benefits claimants voting Labour, students voting Lib Dem or Labour, poor working class people voting Labour. Actually, according to the data I've given you, it's actually Conservatives or Reform. Older working class people, definitely Lib Dems. Retired people, overwhelmingly Conservatives. Diverse ethnicity, Labour. Rich people, Lib Dem / Labour. NHS staff, overwhelmingly Labour. And finally, the only group of people that isn't an in-group, they're an out-group actually, is just your average Joe, you know, native white person with an average salary. You have your Conservative and Reform voter. And so yeah, this basically explains why the Labour and Lib Dems have won so many seats, because they have the in-groups. They have those in-groups concentrated in certain areas. Because the popular vote doesn't necessarily matter, it's all about the seats. Yeah. And yeah, this concludes my video today. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.